Just a short and quick movie today. I wanted to talk to you about our green beans and some of the problems we've had with them this year. Today I'll be picking some of those. So I wanted to show you a couple of things. Earlier in the season I showed you when those plants were just germinating and we mulched the whole bed. But since then they have grew very well, thanks to the frequent rains we had this spring and early summer. And now that we're in our second week of very high temperatures, as most of Europe, there's a heat wave currently here. It's very obvious that the plants are suffering, and no amount of watering can offset for the very high temperature and high sun irradiation. One of the first signs of trouble is I hope you can see that those are the newest, tiniest baby beans which are just now forming, and some of the tips, they don't have the fruit formed because of the heat stress. The flowers are just falling off even if they are pollinated. The plants are just dropping their flowers. We still will be getting some harvest. You can see here there's decent amount of beans to harvest, but those plants won't be producing much more. So after this pick, maybe we'll have another one to gather those smallest baby beans which are now forming, but they won't be flowering anymore, and probably most of the flowers which are now open will just drop without setting fruit. So what we usually do is by the beginning of August we plant a second bed of those, and before our frost in mid-October they're able to produce enough for several picks. We usually use those two varieties, one of them producing green pods and the other one yellow. They perform really well for us, but besides the heat stress, another thing that got in the way of having more harvest was the presence of our neighbors' chicken which visit our garden. I've showed them in another video, I'll link it in the card, but as they like to forage in the vegetable beds, most of the plants here, after they forage, just flop down because their scratching action pushes the plants actually down, and they just flop over, and that's the reason why those pods are curved and not straight, compared to the ones like those in the middle of the bed which have not fallen over and they're growing straight. You can see here how some of the plants don't have any fruit on them yet, but they have much more flowers. Those are the ones that we seeded later a second time, because as I've told you in the previous video, some of the beans were not germinating properly, or probably they were eaten below ground by ground crickets or slugs. So we seeded a second time, and the plants that were seeded later are flowering now, while the other ones have already been picked at least once. And here you can see the damage which was done at a later time. They were probably nibbled by a snail or a slug, and then the plants flopped over and died, and the chickens finished them. So we usually seed them denser than needed, precisely for that reason, so we can have extra ponds in the same area if some of them fail. So we've picked about a kilo of the green beans, and as we still haven't eaten the last batch which we picked last week, those will be stored in our freezer. For this type of green beans, which we call French beans, those round pods, the best way to store them is to snap them into smaller pieces, like halves or thirds, and blanch them in boiling water for maybe 5 to 7 minutes. Then drain them and put them in a box in your freezer, and they store pretty well, and they keep their texture, and also they're very easy to use that way. For example, if we are making like a vegetable stew, you can just dump the whole block of frozen green beans into the stew at the end of the cooking period, because they're blanched and they don't need much time to be cooked completely. And we also do similar stuff when we're cooking rice with vegetables. We just put the frozen blanched vegetables at the end of the cooking of the rice, and they're done in a few minutes. This is for today's clip. I will probably be making another one when we start seeding the fall rotation, which will be done into another bed. So I'll see you in the next one.